My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm 34 years old. For the past 11 years, I've worked as a senior audit manager for a mid-sized but highly respected financial firm in Philadelphia my life. If plotted on a spreadsheet, would check all the boxes: stable income, no debt, clean credit, a high-rise apartment in Rittenhouse Square with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that costs more than I ever talk about, no spouse, no children, no pets. My time is mine, and most of it belongs to work. There's a kind of order to my world, everything itemized, everything justified. The walls of my apartment are white and mostly bare. My refrigerator holds glass containers, labeled by day and portion. I take no risks, not because I fear failure, but because I was raised to believe that the world doesn't give second chances to people who can't carry others. That belief never left me. I grew up in Bangor, Maine, a town with winters that feel endless and people who never quite leave each other alone. My mother still lives in the house where I spent my teenage years, vinyl setting, sagging porch, the same curtains for over 20 years. My younger sister Melanie never moved out. Not really. She has a room, and so does my brother Noah. The three of them have orbiting patterns, rarely colliding, but never apart. Every year, I return there for Christmas, and every year, the weight I carry back with me is a little heavier than the last. This year was no different. I arrived early, as usual, just after sunrise. The sky was still a pale blue, the kind of cold that slices through wool. I brought a bottle of wine, a spiral-cut ham, and 6 carefully wrapped gifts. The house looked warm from the outside. Inside, laughter spilled from the living room in overlapping voices, muffled by garlands and the artificial scent of pine. The moment I walked through the front door, I felt a damp undercurrent, something misaligned. The fireplace was lit, the stockings were hung, but no one turned toward me. My mother adjusted an ornament without looking up. Melanie sipped coffee from a porcelain cup I hadn't seen before. Noah scrolled through his phone. I waited. When my sister finally spoke, her words landed with a quiet finality that didn't invite response. I stood still for a moment, allowing the silence to frame me. No one filled it. I placed the gifts by the tree as I always did. But this time, I added one more item, a black file box mat, heavy, deliberate. I set it down gently beneath the lowest branch, then straightened and walked out without closing the door behind me. There was no confrontation, no raised voices, just a decision, served cold, wrapped in tradition. I didn't ask questions. Some truths don't require answers, only timing. Asterisk for months, maybe years. If I'm honest, I had felt something slipping, not loudly, not all at once. It was the kind of erosion that happened slowly, like water carving stone. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself they were just going through a tough time. I reminded myself of old birthdays and late-night phone calls and childhood secrets buried in the backyard of the Bangor house. But the pattern wasn't changing. It was calcifying. The requests had started small, a few $100s here, or tuition gap there, unpaid utility bills, a broken furnace, an emergency vet bill for a dog I'd never actually seen. The calls always came with a pause before the ask, always framed in obligation, always followed by vague promises. For a long time, I obliged. No hesitation, no second guessing. I wired money late at night from hotel rooms and airport lounges. I added notes like gift or temporary and convinced myself it made a difference. What I didn't tell anyone, not even my assistant, who once joked that I was probably bankrolling half of New England, was that I had started documenting everything. Not formally, at first, just scribbled notes in the margins of day planners, forwarded emails into a labeled folder, screenshotted Venmo requests. I never deleted messages. I save every thank you text, every informal agreement to repay. There's a kind of quiet that comes with watching a system form. Found your silence, as structure builds, slowly and invisibly, where people learn exactly how far you'll bend before you break. And I bent, again and again. But I wasn't asleep. I wasn't naive. I was, in my own way, waiting. It was a spreadsheet that made it real. A random night in late spring, I couldn't sleep. And instead of scrolling or reading or calling someone I trusted, though I wasn't sure who that was anymore, I opened Excel. I listed out every transaction I could recall from the past 5 years. At first, it felt pointless, just a way to externalize the chaos. But then the numbers took shape. Dates, dollar amounts, reasons, rent, copays, bill, groceries, cosmetic procedures thinly disguised as medical emergencies. It added up quickly. I hit 6 figures before I even reached the year before last. That was the night I bought the black file box. I didn't fill it right away. At first, I tucked the spreadsheet inside with a few printouts. But once I started paying attention, I couldn't stop. Bank statements with highlighter marks, text threads exported and printed, voicemails transcribed. It became a habit. Every time someone asked for help, I responded with calm efficiency, then quietly added a new page. I didn't mention it. I never let on. The thing is, they didn't stop asking. If anything, the requests became more casual. As if I were a subscription service for their lives. Melanie began calling less often, but only when she needed something. Noah stopped pretending his business ideas were anything more than placeholders. My mother became increasingly performative, dramatic sighs, long pauses, all the familiar cues. But I stopped asking questions. I nodded, I transferred, I added entries to the file. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd hired someone, not a private investigator in the traditional sense, but close, someone with access, someone discreet. She pulled property records. She tracked travel history. She found accounts I hadn't known existed. It wasn't the lies that hurt the most, it was the ease of them, the confidence that I wouldn't look deeper. There was a weekend in July when Melanie told me she was behind on her mortgage and begged for $8,000. I wired it the same day. A week later, I received a Google alert I'd set on her name. It linked to a tagged photo from a hotel opening in Aspen. She was smiling, drink in hand, the caption referencing her little escape from chaos. I printed the screenshot, trimmed it neatly, and slid it into the file. That same month, Noah insisted he needed a short-term loan to keep his e-commerce platform alive. I asked for a business plan. He sent me a Google Doc filled with vague charts and stock photos. I wired $12,000 anyway. 2 weeks later, the Pi sent me DMV records. No, I had just registered a new Jeep under a friend's name. Insurance records followed. I made a note in the spreadsheet. By autumn, I'd stopped waiting for apologies. I no longer hoped they'd offer a payment. I wasn't holding out for gratitude or recognition. I had moved into another phase entirely, one I hadn't named yet, but could feel in my bones. Quiet observation, deliberate record keeping, strategic detachment. When my promotion came in September, I told no one, not even in passing. I increased my contributions to my retirement account and blocked Melanie from seeing my Instagram stories. That was the same month I received a copy of my mother's credit card statement. The card I had paid off earlier in the year. It showed charges from multiple online betting platforms, including one flagged for fraud in 3 states. The balance was almost back to where it had been before I cleared it. I printed the statement, added it to the box. Thanksgiving was the final rehearsal. I flew in late and left early. I brought dessert from a bakery I didn't mention by name, knowing they'd Google the price. I gave gift cards instead of cash. I took mental snapshots of every offhand comment, every awkward silence when the topic of money came up. That night, back in my hotel, I updated the timeline I'd been building. I labeled it Phase 2. December moved quickly. I bought everyone thoughtful presents, items I knew they'd appreciate, things I'd chosen with care. But I also printed letters, one for each of them, sealed in envelopes with their names in blue ink. I stacked them beside the gifts and rehearsed what I would do. Not say there would be very little to say, but do. I didn't dread Christmas. That surprised me. I felt something close to anticipation. though not the kind I remembered from childhood. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even justice. It was something cleaner, a kind of stillness. There's a moment just before a wave breaks, just before glass shatters, just before a door slams shut when the air changes. You feel it, even if you can't name it. That's what I felt on the drive to Bangor. The black file box buckled beside me on the passenger seat. Snow beginning to fall again. The past, documented. The present, silent. The future, waiting, asterisk. The week before Christmas moved with an odd slowness, like time had thickened into something viscous. I went to work as usual, made coffee at home, walked to the office through cold wind that cut across Market Street. My desk remained organized, my emails answered promptly, my schedule uninterrupted. No one at the firm noticed anything different, and there was nothing for them to notice. The end-of-year financial reviews were coming in as expected. Bonuses were processed. Our partners were preparing to disappear into ski resorts and second homes. I signed documents, attended virtual briefings, returned voicemails. Everything remained in order. At night, I reviewed files. There was a rhythm to it by then, carefully rehearsed. Methodical. I would take a stack of documents from the black file box, lay them out on the dining table, and read each one again, not because I had forgotten what they contained, but because I wanted the lines imprinted, the numbers, the language, the subtle ways deception took shape. I annotated margins in pencil. I rearranged pages by date, by sender, by category. I flagged details that might matter later. The silence of my apartment made it easier to hear what I'd missed the first time. I made one phone call each day, always at the same time. Short calls, calm voices. Follow-ups, confirmations. No one knew who I was speaking to. No one asked. The people I interacted with had no connection to my family, no ties to Bangor. That was important. I didn't want interference. I didn't want interpretation. I wanted clean facts. I kept the file box near the door. Some nights, I'd walk through my apartment just to test how it felt. Lights off, heels soft against the hardwood. A ritual, maybe, or something closer to rehearsal. I'd imagine how it might unfold. How many steps from the kitchen to the door. How long it would take to retrieve something from the coat closet. Whether the tone in my voice would hold. Whether it even needed to. They were texting again by Thursday. Melanie sent a list of who was bringing what for the meal. Noah forwarded a meme, an inside joke from years ago. My mother sent a photo of the tree, fully decorated, with a caption about how the house felt just right this year. None of them mentioned what had been said at Thanksgiving. No one brought up money. The silence between us had been papered over with traditions and logistics. I responded politely. If briefly, I didn't ask questions. I scheduled a car inspection. I made sure my oil was changed. I restocked the emergency kit in the trunk with bottled water and a flashlight. I booked a hotel room in town under another name, not for secrecy, just for peace of mind. The final gift I purchased arrived on Friday. I didn't wrap it like the others. I placed it inside the file box, tucked between manila folders and numbered exhibits. I didn't look at it again. On Saturday, I walked through Rittenhouse Park as if nothing was different. I bought coffee from a vendor I liked. I stopped in a bookstore and browsed without buying. I carried no bags. I made no calls. I returned home in the early afternoon and reorganized the envelopes again. Everything was labeled. Everyone had their own. That evening, I stood in front of my closet longer than usual. I chose a dark green wool coat, lined and understated. It had weight. I packed an overnight bag with essentials, just in case. Nothing excessive. Toothbrush, charger, to changes of clothes. I slipped the bag into the trunk and unlocked the car. The black file box I placed on the passenger seat. Sunday was silent. The city emptied out, or seemed to. I saw fewer people on the streets. Restaurants closed early. The sky turned a flat gray that promised snow. I stayed in and reviewed my notes one last time. I didn't speak all day. I left the TV off. I didn't listen to music. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was clarifying. I didn't dream that night. On the morning of the 24th, I woke before the alarm. I moved slowly, without rush, coffee, a shower. I dressed in black trousers and a crimson sweater. Not festive, not somber, just clean lines and quiet structure. I slid on my watch. The leather band had just begun to crease. By 8:15, I was in the car. The streets were damp with frost. The sun hadn't fully risen. I drove in silence. No radio, no phone calls. At a rest stop, I checked the box. Nothing had shifted. Bangor was 5.5 hours away. The roads were clear, but I drove at an even pace. My hands remained steady on the wheel. My breathing never changed. I noticed things I hadn't before: the way the trees leaned with the wind, the way frost clung to the edges of street signs. Some were past a guster. Snow began to fall, light and unhurried. I didn't turn on the wipers. I let it collect. I arrived in town just after 2. The house looked the same. It always did. White siding, trim faded slightly more each year. A plastic reindeer on the porch. Kindles in the windows. The driveway was full. Noah's car, Melanie's SUV, my mother's sedan. I parked at the curb, left the engine running for a moment, then turned it off. The gift bag I lifted from the back seat. The black file box from the front. I walked slowly. There was no rush. Inside, I knew what I'd find. Laughter, music, the smell of cinnamon and cloves. I imagined the arrangement: the gifts already placed, the coffee already poured. They would be waiting, but not for me, not consciously, just as a matter of habit. As I reached the porch, I paused. Snow had started to cover the doormat. My boots left clean prints. I knocked once and stepped inside. Their voices faltered slightly, just enough to register, but not long. I was greeted, if that's what it could be called. Someone took the wine from my hand. Someone commented on the weather. Someone nodded from a distance. I smelled. Briefly, I placed the ham on the kitchen counter, the gift bag beneath the tree, and the black file box on a side table beside the window. No one asked about it. Not then. Conversations resumed, light, floating, self-contained. No one asked about work. No one mentioned the fall. No one brought up Thanksgiving. The room moved on without me, as if I were a detail that had already been managed. I sat on the edge of a chair and folded my hands. Someone poured champagne. Someone laughed loudly at something on a screen. The box remained closed. Time passed, and yet, in that stillness, everything had already begun. The sound of wrapping paper and low conversation filled the room, layered with the clink of glass and the occasional hollow ring of a phone left buzzing on our tabletop. My mother handed out plates. Melanie adjusted her earrings, posed briefly for a selfie she pretended not to take. Noah scrolled absently, half laughing at something on his screen. The gifts had been opened in the usual way: structured, performative, polite. A mug from Melanie, a clearance scarf from my mother, a bookstore gift card from Noah. All of it expected, all of it just enough. I placed my envelopes carefully on the coffee table, one for each of them, printed names in blue ink. Alongside them, a sealed document thick with notarized pages. The room hadn't noticed yet. I watched it all unfold from a distance of only a few feet, as if I were watching someone else's family in someone else's home. No one reached for the envelopes. Not at first. The black file box set slightly apart, its matte surface catching the light in a dull gleam. I had opened it without drummer. One hand, no announcement, no gesture of finality. I simply lifted the lid and set it back. I placed the first folder beside the envelopes. That's when the shift began. A question hung in the air, voiceless, but unmistakable. It passed between them in glances, brief and unspoken. Melanie was the first to move, but not to the papers. She leaned back, arms folded, eyes narrowing, not in confusion, but in recognition. A calculation began behind her silence. Noah stopped scrolling. My mother took a step closer to the table, but didn't reach for anything. Her eyes flicked over the papers, then toward me, then back again. She said something. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to add. I laid out the second folder. The tension sharpened. Noah finally leaned forward, his expression shifting uncertain, then sharp, then blank. He pulled one of the pages halfway from its folder, skimmed it, and froze. The page held financial records, account summaries, payment confirmations, wire receipts. His name was on several, so was mine. His voice cracked, not loud, but high enough that Melanie turned toward him. She took a step forward and looked at the page over his shoulder. She said something sharp, but I didn't catch it. She pulled out another sheet, then another. Her jaw tightened. The room's temperature dropped. Though the fire still burned up, my mother picked up the legal document. Her eyes moved slowly, line by line, until her expression faltered. She set the pages down with trembling fingers and turned away. The motion was small, but telling. She didn't sit. She didn't speak. She just moved. Melanie found the photograph's next images printed in clean color on glossy stock. One showed the cabin in Vermont purchased last year, another, receipts from a cosmetic clinic in Santa Monica. A third, screenshots of public social media posts timestamped within days of money requests. They were arranged deliberately. She shuffled through them with increasingly erratic motions. Her breathing changed. Noah stood up. He said something again, short, defensive, the tone of someone who didn't realize the ground beneath him was no longer solid. He reached for another document. His hands shook as he flipped pages. He looked for gaps in the record, places he could push back. He found none. The envelopes remained untouched. I stood still. There were sounds now chaotic, overlapping. Melanie raised her voice, gesturing to the papers, then to me, then to Noah. My mother sat on the arm of the couch, elbows on her knees, face in her hands. She said something into her palms, inaudible. Her voice cracked. The fire snapped behind her. Noah dropped the folder he'd been holding. He walked to the far side of the room and stared out the window. I could see the outline of his reflection against the glass, rigid, uncertain. The snow had picked up again outside, a soft blur under the porch light. Melanie crossed the room, her heels hitting the floor with uneven force. She stopped directly in front of me. Her mouth moved. Her expression shifted rapidly, confusion, then anger, then something I couldn't name. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. She turned away sharply, moving toward the kitchen. The sound of a cabinet slamming echoed through the silence. A drawer opened and closed. A glass cracked against the edge of the counter, not shattered, but fractured enough to draw attention. I set down the next folder. This one was labeled verification materials. Inside were screenshots of text messages, recordings transcribed and notarized, photographs dated and geotagged. I didn't point to anything. I didn't need to. Their names were on nearly every page. My mother looked up again. Her eyes were red now, rimmed and wet. She blinked slowly, as if waking from something, though she didn't reach for any of the papers. She just watched them, scattered across the coffee table, edges curled from the heat of the fire. Noah moved first. He walked back to the table, picked up one of the envelopes with his name on it. He read the first page in silence, then the second. His face changed again, but subtly, this time less defiant, more resigned. He sat back down without a word, envelope in hand. Melanie refused to touch hers. My mother hadn't moved. I took a small step back, just enough to give space. The next minutes passed without shape. The room fractured into separate centers of gravity. Melanie stood pacing near the dining room archway. Noah hunched on the couch, envelope now unopened again in his lap. My mother had gone quiet entirely. Somewhere behind the stillness, Christmas music still played her soft instrumental version of something familiar and harmless. The lights on the tree blinked at regular intervals. The fire burned low. I walked to the table, closed the black file box, and clipped the lid. The lock clicked softly. I lifted it with both hands, held it for a moment, then set it near the coats by the door. They knew now. That was enough. The snow continued through the evening and into the next morning, soft and heavy, muting everything beyond the windows. I didn't return to the house. I checked into the hotel I'd reserved under the other name and watched the storm settle over Bangor from a room with no decorations and no noise. The silence fell clean by noon. My phone began to vibrate. I didn't answer. The messages came in waves, first from Noah, then Melanie, then my mother, a mix of outrage and uncertainty, protest and pleading, layered beneath phrases meant to reframe or deflect. I archived everything without reading past the preview. I had said what I needed to say. I had shown what needed to be shown. That the following day, I drove back to Philadelphia in steady snowfall. The roads were clear enough by late morning, and the traffic was light. I made no stops. The black file box sat locked beside me in the passenger seat. Though I no longer needed to open, its contents had done what they were meant to do. I returned to work on the 27th. The office was quiet. Most people still out for the holidays. I used the time to clear my inbox, prepare for quarter end, and finalize a report that had been delayed for months. My calendar was mine again. No requests, no calls from Bangor, just rows of tasks I could complete without interruption. The first unexpected email arrived just after New Year's. It came from a financial ethics nonprofit I had once donated to but never interacted with directly. They were hosting a panel on the psychological impact of familial financial exploitation. The organizer had read a blog post I had written anonymously months earlier, something short, reflective, buried in a community forum under a pseudonym. Somehow, it had made its way to them. They asked if I'd consider speaking, not as a victim, but as a strategist, someone who had navigated the situation with clarity and boundaries. I read the email twice before replying. That same week, a junior colleague asked if I'd be open to mentoring. She had overheard part of a conversation I'd had with a client and said she admired the way I handled tension steady, direct, unshaken. She said it made her think differently about leadership. I agreed to meet with her weekly, no formality, just space to think out loud. It felt new. Noah sent a check in mid-January, not the full amount, not even close, but enough to indicate the start of something. It was accompanied by a note, not apologetic, not dramatic, just an acknowledgement of the terms outlined in the envelope he had taken from the table. A few days later, I received confirmation that he had enrolled in a certification program I had once suggested years ago. He didn't mention that part. The nonprofit confirmed my panel slot in February. I prepared quietly, without telling many people at work. The room was smaller than I expected, a round table setting with community leaders, legal professionals, and a few survivors who spoke plainly, without the tricks. I shared my experience in clean lines, timelines, patterns, processes. I didn't name anyone. I didn't need to. When I finished, someone approached me to ask if I would be willing to help them draft a framework for others navigating similar dynamics. I said yes. Melanie didn't reach out directly, but I noticed she changed the privacy settings on her social accounts. The photos from Aspen disappeared. The tag post slowed. Through quiet channels, I learned she had listed her home for sale and downsized to a smaller place 2 towns over. There was no public explanation, only new wallpaper and a quieter tone in her captions. My mother called twice. I let both go to voicemail. The second message was shorter than the first, her voice calmer, unsure. She mentioned having started counseling. She said she'd begun attending a support group. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't try to explain. She just said she was trying. I didn't call back. The mentoring grew into something more structured, a small group formed for women from different departments, all navigating forms of invisible labor. We met once a month in a side conference room with coffee and notepads, no agendas, just shared space. It became the part of my schedule I never moved. By March, I had been invited to contribute to a white paper on internal fraud recognition within family-owned businesses. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I approached it as I would any project: clear metrics, actionable recommendations, a tone that balanced empathy with precision. The paper circulated more widely than expected. My name attached to it brought invitations to speak, consult, and collaborate. I accepted some, I declined others. I chose deliberately. The repayments came slowly, but they came, some in checks, some in deposits with no name, just a note that read per agreement. I tracked them in a private document, not as retribution, just as closure. Every entry marked a chapter turned. I replaced the black file box with a smaller binder half the size, 1/3 the weight. It held only what was still active. The rest I store in a fireproof container, sealed and dated. I didn't need to open it again, but I wanted it intact. Spring arrived in hint sunlight stretching longer across the hardwood floors, the return of weekend markets, the soft rhythm of life outside my window. I bought a small plant and placed it on the sill. It grew in the weeks that followed. Without fanfare, thought sometimes, I still walked past the side table where the box once sat. The surface was clean now, empty, but I remembered its weight, not with regret, not with triumph, just with certainty. The chapters had shifted, the next had begun, asterisk. It was a quiet afternoon in May when I stood behind the podium, waiting for the moderator to finish her introduction. The event was held in a modest hall inside a converted university building just off the Schuylkill River. The room was filled with people I didn't know: social workers, nonprofit organizers, junior financial analysts, law students. Some had come out of professional curiosity. Others, I sensed, for reasons they hadn't yet found words for. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer and let the final applause fade before stepping forward. The invitation had come 3 weeks earlier, from the chair of a financial wellness summit. She had read the white paper I had co-authored and said my story had made its way to her through mutual channels. She spoke carefully, respectfully, and asked if I would be willing to speak not only about policy, but about the personal, not as a cautionary tale. As an example of restoration, I had hesitated. Then I had said yes. Now I looked out at the audience and began the way I always preferred to begin, with structure. I didn't mention names. I didn't dramatize the details. I walked them through a timeline how personal financial boundaries are often eroded in the name of love, obligation, family, how silence becomes a form of currency, how clarity, once found, doesn't always come gently. There were moments when I paused, but not from discomfort, from awareness. I could feel the way the room was listening, still, intent. I spoke for 25 minutes, then sat quietly while others asked questions, some about process, some about ethics, a few about healing. I answered as honestly as I could, without telling anyone what to do. Afterward, a woman in her 50s approached me in the hallway. She said nothing at first, only held out a folded piece of paper. When I opened it later that evening, it contained 4 lines written in neat cursive. I haven't told anyone, but now I think I might. There was no name. Recognition didn't come in grand gestures. It arrived in subtle shifts. My manager asked me to lead a new initiative around internal mentorship and emotional risk in high-pressure teams. Original Magazine included me in a feature about women changing the culture of finance from within. A former classmate from grad school reached out to say she had heard I was doing something different now, though she wasn't sure what it was. I let her wonder. My family, for the most part, remained quiet. There were updates, but they came through channels, not through emotion. Noah sent a handwritten note with his 3rd repayment. He said he had completed the certification and been hired on a trial basis at a mid-tier tech firm in Portland. He didn't ask for congratulations. I didn't send one. It was enough. My mother, over time, began sending short updates lines about her recovery, her work with a counselor, her volunteer hours at a local literacy center. I responded only once, with a postcard that read, "Keep going. That's enough." I don't know how she received it. I don't think I need to. Melanie remained distant. Her email arrived months later to paragraphs, mostly logistical, confirming her repayment schedule would remain on track. At the end was one line, separate from the rest: "You were always the one we underestimated." I closed the message without replying. I knew she hadn't meant it as an apology, but it was the closest she'd ever come at home. My life had changed in small ways that felt disproportionately meaningful. I slept better. I started cooking more. I joined a hiking group that met on Sundays and never asked what I did for a living. I stopped waiting for silence to be filled and learned to let it stand. I moved the smaller binder to the bottom drawer of my desk and replaced the space where it had been with a plant that needed regular. Our watering, the file box, sealed and archived, remains stored out of sight. Sometimes, when I passed the mirror on my way out in the morning, I barely recognized the person I had been a year ago, not because of the exterior, my clothes, my posture, my expression, but because of what was no longer there, the weight of responsibility that had never been mine to carry. One afternoon in early June, I received a letter, not email, but a real letter handwritten in blue ink on thick paper. It came from someone who had attended the summit. She was starting a community program for young adults learning to manage money without family support, and she wanted to know if I'd consider being a guest speaker or mentor. She ended the note by saying that hearing my story made her realize that survival and dignity could exist in the same sentence. I wrote back with one sentence, yes. And thank you for asking me to begin again on different terms. The world hadn't changed. Not really. There were still systems that failed people. There were still stories that ended without justice. But I had found a different alignment, one where I didn't need to be rescued, didn't need to be right, didn't need to explain. I had chosen to stop making sense of other people's choices and start making room for my own in the end. The most honest victories are quiet. They don't announce themselves. They just leave you standing exactly where you are, finally able to stay. For a long time, I believed that love meant saying yes. That family meant sacrifice without question. That being needed was the same as being valued. But over time, silence became weight, and weight became clarity. Setting boundaries didn't come naturally, it came from exhaustion. From long nights with spreadsheets and unanswered messages. From the slow realization that I had been financing not just lifestyles, but illusions. What changed wasn't them, it was me. There's something quietly powerful in choosing yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of survival. And then, out of self-respect, I didn't set out to make a statement. I simply stopped making excuses. Maybe you felt that shift to a moment when the story you're in no longer sounds like your voice, when the obligations you carry feel heavier than the relationships that created them. If you have, you're not alone. And you're not wrong to want something different. Not every ending comes with applause. Sometimes, it's just a locked file box, a return check, or the first night of sleep that doesn't carry someone else's burden. What does it mean to be part of a family? What do we owe each other and what do we owe ourselves? Whatever your answer may be, I hope you find the courage to live it out, fully and without apology.